So welcome back to Vlog Media. This is me, Dr. Mark, and today we're going to talk about something different. Yeah, something special because I wear my costume in medicine. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about something about research. And in the last video, we talked about the effects of Molnupiravir and how it works. So for today, we shall talk about the research behind the recommendations for Molnupiravir. So it involves about a clinical trial, and we shall delve about in a short while. So let's begin. Talk about this original article here, which was published last December 2021, and talk about the Molnupiravir for oral treatment of COVID-19 in hospitalized patients. So the original article, I put it below in the link. So if you wish to do so and read it, and you can click on the link below. So apparently this clinical trial is actually a phase 3 double-blinded and randomized controlled trial. So when you talk about phase 3 trial, you're talking about a clinical trial wherein you have to compare two medications, whether it's a placebo or a medication, and you want to see which one is better. So that's why it's called a phase 3. And when you talk about double-blind, the participants in the study do not know whether they're taking the placebo or the medication. And of course, the randomized controlled trial is a design wherein you want to look at the effectiveness of the medications in question. So for the objective of the study is actually to determine the safety and efficacy of the Molnupiravir versus the placebo among unvaccinated people with comorbidities. And this is the way they designed the trial. So you first have these unvaccinated subjects here with comorbidities with mild COVID-19, and they divided into two groups. So the other group is the placebo group, okay, and the Molnupiravir group. So that's what they do, and after some time they will look at the results and compare which one is apparently more superior to one another. Is it the Molnupiravir or is it the placebo, or are they just simply the same? Well, we'll see. So in short, how are they able to work on this research? So the scientists basically, they recruit participants with the following features. So when you do a clinical trial, you have to have this inclusion criteria wherein there's some requirements for the participants to enter the clinical trial, so they won't really skew the results. So the inclusion criteria for this clinical trial includes that the participants should be COVID positive for no more than 5 days, and they should at least have one sign or symptom of COVID-19, and of course one risk factor. And the risk factor for severe COVID-19 are the following: more than 60-year-old, diabetes, with obesity, hypertensive, with cardiac diseases, and so forth. At least they should have one risk factor to be included in the study. And of course, at least they're not vaccinated. So if they're not vaccinated or they have contraindication to COVID-19 vaccination, then they can be included in the study. And of course, lastly, they should consent to clinical study. And of course, we also have the exclusion criteria, and they were excluded if they need to be hospitalized within the 48 hours of COVID-19 diagnosis, they have very poor kidney function, or pregnant, and if they're unwilling to use contraception during the treatment period, because we still don't know whether this medication has teratogenic effects. That's why they placed the exclusion criteria on number 4. And if they have a low white blood cell count, if they have a low platelet count, if they had the COVID-19 vaccination. So please take note, this trial is about participants who were unvaccinated by any chance or by any means. And of course, lastly, if no consent was given, of course, they will be excluded in the study. And this trial was actually voluntary in its nature. So to determine the efficacy of Molnupiravir, here's what they did. So the scientists wanted to determine whether the participants will be hospitalized within the first 29 days upon COVID-19 diagnosis. And that includes those who actually died, unfortunately, in the initial 29 days too. And so they were able to recruit a total of 1,433 participants in the study. And upon recruitment, they were randomized into two groups. So when you talk about randomization, meaning the participants doesn't know whether they will be assigned to the Molnupiravir group or the placebo group. Well, we do that in clinical trials because we want to reduce bias among the two groups. So they were randomized to either the Molnupiravir group, which included 716 participants, and the placebo group, which included 717 participants. So they're almost equal in number. And the first thing you want to do when they're randomized to the two groups, so you want to make sure that the two groups have similar characteristics before the start of the study, because or else you will never know the differences if they're different in the first place. So the Molnupiravir group received 800 milligrams of Molnupiravir a day for 5 days, while the placebo group received identically looking tablets twice a day for about 5 days. And it's a blinded study again, meaning that the participants as well as the doctors treating them have no clue whether the participants received Molnupiravir or the placebo. So here's actually the flow chart. So initially there were actually 1,637 participants. However, 204 of them were screened but did not undergo randomization. As I mentioned earlier, if they were not randomized, then of course the study would be biased, so they excluded 204. And they ended up with 1,433 who actually underwent randomization. So 716 were assigned to Molnupiravir and the other 717 were assigned to the placebo group. However, not all of them will actually follow through until the last follow-up, because some of them will have side effects or protocol violations to which they were excluded. And of course, just to keep things simple, these are the results, and about 709 were included in the Molnupiravir group in the final computation, and 699 were also included in the final computation in the placebo group. While in the Molnupiravir group, there is actually unfortunately one death, okay, which is most likely probably due to COVID-19, and while in the placebo group, it included 9 deaths. So that's the flow chart for this study. So this is actually the hospitalization chart. This is what we call a Kaplan-Meier curve. So initially, at the start of the study, the number of patients, obviously 100%. Obviously, as they were observed for the next 29 days, you will see a decline in the number, meaning that the numbers of unhospitalized patients were getting lesser and lesser by the day. So those who were hospitalized were taken out from this, and they were considered as treatment failure. So as you can see here, the yellow line is actually the Molnupiravir group, while the dashed line is actually the placebo. Now, if you're going to magnify this area here, you will come up with the table right here. So the table here is just a magnified view of the table here. So if you magnify it, so you can see that the Molnupiravir group has less hospitalizations. Many of them were not hospitalized as compared to the placebo group. So if you're gonna take a look at it, it's about 94% versus about 91 to 92% in the placebo group. So let's take a look at the computation. So, okay, let's compute for the results. And the first question here is, what is the proportion of those who were hospitalized in the Molnupiravir group? So here's the result. So in the Molnupiravir group, there's a total of 700 participants who actually completed the study. And apparently out of 709, 45 of them were hospitalized. And that leaves about a total of 6.77% of them were hospitalized. Let's look at the placebo group now. And so what's the proportion of those who were hospitalized in the placebo group? Sorry, this is the placebo group. So the placebo group, there were a total about 699 participants, and about 68 of them were hospitalized, leaving a total of 9.728% of them being hospitalized. So actually in research, what do? We just actually simply subtract them from one another, and that's what you call the difference in the two groups. There's about a difference of about 2.958% between the two groups. So the absolute difference about 3%. So meaning to say that, there is an absolute difference of hospitalization among the placebo group. There's actually 3% more hospitalization in the placebo group as compared to the Molnupiravir group. Right, sorry. So let's now compute for the efficacy. So this, what everybody's waiting for, the efficacy. Just like the vaccines, we will use the same formula for efficacy. It's very simple. It's not very difficult to compute for the efficacy as long as you have the data for the computations. So okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the risk of hospitalization for Molnupiravir is about 6.77%, while the risk of hospitalization of taking placebo is quite a lot more, which is about 9.728%. So if you want to compute for the efficacy, we have to divide them both. So if you take if you will divide them both, we'll come up with a result, which is about 0.696. And 0.696 is also what we call the hazard ratio. So when you talk about the hazard ratio, anything that is more than 1 is called more hazardous, and if it's less than 1, it's less hazardous. So in this case, 0.696 is less than 1. You can say that you can actually conclude that the risk of hospitalization of participants taking molnupiravir is less hazardous as compared to taking your placebo. So it kind of makes sense that it's less hazardous because it has a lesser percentage of participants being hospitalized as compared to your placebo. So, but again, this is just a hazard ratio, but if you're going to compute for the efficacy, what we're going to do is simply we're going to subtract the hazard ratio from 1. That's what we're going to do. So in short, that's 1 minus the hazard ratio, which is 0.696, and we will come up with a result of 0.30. Even if you're going to put it into percentage, that will be 30.4%, and that will be the efficacy of the molnupiravir group as compared to the placebo group. So in short, the efficacy is about 30.4% compared to the placebo group. And what does it mean? So it means that if you are actually unvaccinated and you have a risk factor such as an old age, cardiac disease, a kidney disease, or cancer, or probably other risk factors that will predispose you to severe COVID-19, and unfortunately one developed COVID-19, then the risk of getting hospitalized is about 30% less when you take the molnupiravir as compared to not taking the medication at all. So the next question here is, will now molnupiravir protect from dying from COVID-19? Well, we shall see in the next video. So guys, if you want to see whether molnupiravir actually protects the patients from dying from COVID-19, well, you shall see the next video. But if you like this video, please click like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell notification icon for the next video to come. So see you in the next video. Bye!